next step further. I think that our process would have been better if we would have agreed on a board, as a board, to the criteria.
Would be somewhat sort of to, I've gone back and looked at the criteria that we put on the table. I think all of us in different ways. And I've looked at Jim and I've looked at Bill Moyer. And obviously we've come to different conclusions, you know, because we're split at 4-4. So I guess my question, and I would like an answer to the question from somebody, is what were the criteria that you used, and on what basis did you differentiate those two candidates so that you came out with Jim as opposed to Bill? It's not that. My question is, we had two candidates, Jim and Bill, who we were divided by, and I'm interested in how, when we had those two candidates, what were the criteria that differentiated them in anyone's mind here? What criteria people looked at and how you sort of measured them or differentiated Jim to have more of those?
Whatever your criteria were, obviously everyone had their own criteria. How did you weigh the two candidates based on that criteria? And so, you know, I mean, you're saying that that's not important to you. I understand that was, apparently that was not one of your criteria. So what were your criteria, and then how did you weigh those two candidates based on the way that you did distinguish between them? I accept your point, basically, that you're, you know, that among your criteria, experience was not that important. Okay, I mean,
no, it was important.
I mean, not that well.
But it didn't have to,
it did not have
to be unique to school board. We all have
everybody
experiences.
Has experience.
Absolutely.
Right.
And do you have experience? What kind of professional background do you do? You know, if you're an engineer, you bring certain skills. I would say if you're a research scientist, you're data driven, okay, in your decision making. You're analytical, just like an attorney. But I would say if we were looking for someone with project management experience, there was somebody who had multi-million-dollar project management experience, billion-dollar management experience that didn't get a single vote from those of you.
Between two candidates that we're really looking at.
What's that?
I mean, okay, help me out here. Apparently you're looking for certain kinds of experience. I'm still a little unclear.
No, I'm not looking for a certain kind.
Well, how did you weigh them then? What kind of experience were you looking for when you compared the two candidates?
I'm not sure I understand the point of your question,
exactly.
David.
Well, the point is...
Monday night, what we were charged to do...
I'll explain the point if you'll let me. And the point of the question is, each one of us had our own things that we thought were most important, things that our personal criteria. And we looked at the candidates, and then we compared the two based on those criteria. So, I mean, to me, that's the only reasonable process that one would go through. I think experience of a certain kind is important, and this person had more experience, and therefore that's what I'm talking about. So, whatever your criteria was, and I'm not judging your criteria, I'm not quite sure at this moment what they were, but based on whatever that criteria was, how did you compare the two candidates based on that?
Okay. Well, actually, I compared 6 candidates because I was not aware that we were comparing 2 candidates until there was a result of a ballot. So when we go through and we determine who was our top choice, it was a choice of 6, not a choice of 2. And then it became a choice, so to speak, a comparison between 2. But that didn't mean that still wasn't the person whom I thought out of all 6 was the best candidate for that position. So we didn't come in here Monday night predetermining that we were only going to look at 2 candidates. We were still looking at 6 candidates.
Are you still looking at 6 now, or are you looking at 2 at this point?
We still have 6 candidates before us.
So is there actually someone else that you didn't vote for that you think is more qualified among the...
No.
So when you compared the 6, then you like Jim, right? That's reasonable?
That is the candidate that I thought had the best qualifications.
And you think he's more qualified than Bill, right? I'm just following this logically, right?
I have not. I have not changed my mind since Monday.
Based on what criteria?
Based on the criteria that we used previously, and that was someone who possessed values, leadership skills, professional experience, and perspectives that I felt were similar to what we had in our previous board member and who would be in harmony with the will of the voters in the last election. Now, are there other things that's not an extremely specific thing that I can go through and say, it wasn't a checklist. Those are the things that I valued in choosing from the list of 6 that we interviewed. Now, do I think, a commitment to public education is important? Of course I do. Dr. Pawelczyk has exhibited that commitment to public education. A record of public service? Of course, that's fulfilled as well. I thought when he came before us and he spoke, he made us all very comfortable. So obviously it was someone that we could feel comfortable talking to and having an exchange with. Others of the board members, and primarily those of you who were previously board members, put a lot of emphasis on this idea that that person, that right now what we need is someone who has experience on a school board or someone that was around for a long time on the school board. Now, while, as Chris said, those are admirable things, they were useful things to have at that time, I don't discount that. I think that where we are right now is we need to move forward. We need to be looking forward, and I'm not convinced that we need to look back in order to look forward. I think that we have candidates, and in particular a candidate who can offer us skills that will serve us to go forward. I don't have experience on a school board. I think I'm doing fine. There are things that need to be learned. There are things that decisions we have to make, but as far as I know, we haven't missed a deadline yet, have we? Students are still going to school. The teachers are still coming every day. I don't see where the most important thing that we need is somebody that's done this job before.
I mean, really, if you're going to talk about criteria, even when we had the long list, it was interesting to me that there are members of this board on old and new who talked about a candidate that could unify the board. And then when we went to pick people to interview, there were people who picked someone like Kathy Dollar to interview, who I got an email during the election that had total falsehoods about me sent out in a mass email. So why would you want to interview someone who actually said things that weren't true about sitting board members if you wanted to unify them? Or Nancy Cronick, who made a lot of publicity in questioning Ann's ability to do a financial statement when she's an accountant. That's not going to make Ann think, I could really work with someone who in the paper said she's off on $6, and it turned out not to be true. So I felt like when it comes to criteria, that wasn't even focused on to make the short list. I'm just saying that when I went back and looked at our ballots to who we were going to interview, it didn't seem to me that some of the criteria were met to interview. So I felt like once we got to 6 and we interviewed them, we should focus on those 6 and however you come about judging those 6 people. Not hold fast to saying, I want someone unifying, I want someone with experience, I want a steep learning curve. Because some of those things, not wanting a steep learning curve, that wasn't on my criteria list. So we would have spent hours coming up with an 8-person criteria list when some of those things weren't that important to me. I wanted somebody who cared, who was dedicated. I liked the things that Barney had that I don't have. I didn't want to duplicate myself. I'm not an engineer. I'm not detail-oriented. I've never worked with multi-million-dollar budgets. It doesn't make me not qualified to serve this district. But I wanted the person who's replacing Barney to be someone like Barney who has those experiences. So I just don't think focusing on a criteria that 8 people really couldn't have come to an agreement on is the place to then set up Jim and Bill.